He tries to prove that all the Greek and Roman historians, particularly Roman historians that are talking about it, are full of baloney. The whole thing never happened. There was a pogrom against the Jews. And in order to justify it, like you have in Europe today, they'll say the Jews are committing the aggression, and they make all kind of lies out. In other words, Weiss, Gretz, you idiot, you believe that stuff? You understand? Is there anyone other than those three historians that say it? Do we have any evidence outside of them that do so? And by the way, he doesn't mind taking on the Goyim. Theodor Mommsen and the others, these were the big German historians at that time, said, Mommsen, you make a whole a book about the Jews in the Roman Empire. What exactly is your sources? Are they not these three guys? And don't these three guys, you can see, are contradicting each other in the middle? You know what I'm saying? He was a rough customer. Okay, now, there's a whole lot more. As I said before, he has a love-hate relationship with Josephus. He reads Josephus very thoroughly, and he darshans him, like as a Gemara or something like that. But he hates Josephus. But on the other hand, as I pointed out a couple weeks ago, Josephus has all the information. You see? And so what he does is he will selectively, he'll say like this, even within your own writings, I can show how you're inconsistent. Just to give you off the top of my head, you're always saying, you never talk about the Pharisees, you always talk about the Sadducees. That's what Josephus does. And the Hasmonean kings, all the others. And yet you yourself admit that the Pharisees are the ones that are admired by the masses. Wherever they go, crowds form around them. They command the confidence of the public. During their administration, things were pacific. Shlomo Alexander was a Jewish queen who, he says, was terrible. She was under the thumb of the Pharisees. It was disgraceful. But then he goes on to say, during her reign, they balanced the budget for the first time. They doubled the army. They cut the tax in half. They had peace and prosperity. All the neighbors were surrounding them, and the country was at peace. This is the terrible result. You know what I'm saying? No, you're full baloney yourself. So notice he doesn't mind saying the emperor has no clothes. Okay? He has, as I say before, he has a way of brilliantly and tendentiously, brilliantly and fascinatingly juxtaposing Josephus and the Talmud. This is very interesting because he read both of them thoroughly. The Gemara he knew from a baby. But Josephus, he also inside out. And you see, Josephus said this, but if you read the Gemara and you understand this and this was happening at this and this time, then you see Josephus here is full of baloney, and this is what really happened. On the other hand, over here, he's not full of baloney, and this really did happen. So he really did a lot of very interesting things. He says Josephus never mentions the rabbis. That's just interesting. He said, what, they weren't there? You yourself admit, as I just told you before, that the masses attest to the virtue of the Pharisees and followed them around like a shepherd. You understand? So where are they in your book? You hate the rabbis. Okay, so come out and tell us who you really are. He really blasts Josephus' disgraceful whitewashing of Herod. Okay? Even if you go to Israel today, Herod was great. He built the Kotel, he built the Mars Machpelah, he built another place. All the guys will call him Herod the Great. And Halevi said, wait a second. First of all, who's Josephus copying out of? The book that was written by Herod's secretary, Nicholas of Damascus. Second of all, even in that book, they admit that he massacred people, he murdered everybody right and left, and when he died, the Jewish people begged on their knees to the Romans, don't give us another Herod, even better, you should rule us. You get it? And this is the person you call the Great. I'm just, throwing out a few here and there. He is really rocking and rolling when you get to the Churban Beis HaMikdash that we talk about Josephus, okay? Where Josephus is so detailed, and he follows and dissects it and takes apart all the different things over there. And basically, Josephus says he was the hero, and John of Giskel, Yochanan Gushchalov, was the villain. And Halevi said, no, it's the opposite. You're covering up your own crimes, and you think you can do it, but I can tell from what you write that it's not true. And the other guy was the hero, and you're the villain, and I can even prove it. When the Romans have their final triumph, and they execute the leaders of the rebellion, John of Giskel is reprieved. In other words, he's given a life sentence. You understand? He was allowed to live in Rome as a private citizen. Because the Romans knew there really was a good guy, and that everything you're saying is a lie, just trying to cover your own tracks. You see? And the big villain is Agrippa II, as he says over there, who Josephus admits was the one who was paying him while he was writing the book. That's his style. Halevi, I want to get this straight. Halevi was a real frummy, but he closely read the apocryphal literature, all of it. He closely read all the classics, Greek and Roman. He did his homework. You hear what I said? He read all the Greek and Roman authors. He closely read the New Testament, which he quotes from a lot. He closely read Eusebius and the church fathers. You'll be surprised, and I'll tell you again, you're surprised what he comes up with. Now, he uses them for his purposes, but nevertheless, he read all the literature that was written at that time in the ancient world. He's an historian. Now, he is self-taught, but he's an historian. I'll give you an example. He's into Josephus. He doesn't have any time for Yosefon. He doesn't mention him. Because Yosefon, as I told you before, is a fake, whatever the Frum world says. He says he's into the book of Maccabees in the Apocrypha. He never quotes or deals with the Megillah Antiochus, which is what the Frum world says is a myth, is a fake. You see? So he deals with what's really out there. He implicitly criticizes Rishonim who believed in those works. You understand? He indirectly, very indirectly, criticized Rashi and Tosas for observations. There's a famous place in Yavamas where Tosas has some kasha about Herod, and they go like 4 terutzim. And one of the answers is Herod did teshuvah before he died. And he said, I guess, without mentioning Tosas, he says, do you know who Herod was? And do you know how he died? Actually, the Talmud says that the day Herod died was a national holiday, the 6th of Elul. You get it? It was a national holiday. So don't tell me he did any repentance before he died. So he's quite a guy. By the way, Rabbi Breuer, when he was young, in 1920, wrote an article criticizing Halevi, this guy, because, you criticize Rashi. You understand? Now, his critics, when the books came out, tried to diss him on little things. You don't know Greek and Latin. But it wasn't true. He learned Greek and Latin. But that's one of those little nitpicking things. In other words, instead of dealing with the arguments, you're ugly. Your shoes don't shine. You follow? Like Hirsch, Halevi, Yitzhak Halevi Rabinowitz, hates portraits of the Chazal. Right? He can't stand when Weiss and Gretz are there, because he said they're making it up. The canons of historicity don't change. What do you have to tell me about your portrait? I'll just give you one example, getting off the top of my head. They all talk about what a mean guy Shammai was, because he chased the guy out when he wanted to become converted in one fig. But what about the fact that the Pirkei Avos says that the famous slogan of Shammai was, Hevi Mekabelis Kol Adam B'Sever Panim Yafos? What do you do with that? So how do you know this one tells you who the real Shammai is versus this one, for example? Now these are fair questions. I say they're fair questions because there doesn't exist any information about Shammai other than these 3 or 4, 10, whatever statements in the Talmud. So don't go and tell me, see, the public doesn't know this. The public says, if Professor Gretz said this and this, he must have access to something or other, all that out there. But it's not true. You see? And therefore he said like this, the emperor has no clothes, and he's just taking advantage of the fact that in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. That's all that's happening over there. He blasts, now by the way, Hirsch was anti-history. Hirsch felt the same way. When W. C. Hoffman, who was a Frum guy, published his dissertation, biography of Shmuel, it says what? So he says, Samuel, Hirsch wanted to put the book in Cherem because he treats Shmuel like a person. He quotes Gratz and Weiss and all the others over there. He was of a different type. Anyway, that's half of the Doros HaRishonim. When it comes to the era of the Mishnah and the Talmud and the formation of this, where really there's no information, almost, very little, outside of the Talmud and the Mishnah itself, where knowledge of the Talmud counts, Halevi wiped the floor with all the other historians because they didn't come to his level in learning at all. They didn't have his immediate and total knowledge of all the literature. And he offers many fine insights into the composition and history of the text. Here he darshans not Josephus, because Josephus is dead, but Shrir Gaon. There's a famous book, the Igeris for Shrir Gaon, where one of the Gaonim in Babylonia gives the history of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, and he goes at this in great detail, baby. He has a whole long business of the composition. I remember he says there's this layer of the first Tanoim, and then they write the second layer and the third one. Then the first layer of the Talmud Bavli comes in Abaye Rava's time, and then comes the second recension of it. This is technical stuff, but on the other hand, he does this, first of all, to give out his opinion of what happened, and also to destroy the 100 theories that the others created without anything to stand on. He has a lot of insights. He thinks that Talmud Bavli is a finished work, which is something I don't agree with. But it's just, he hammers this home point. If you remember from last summer, wherever, he came up with the idea, who is this Antoninus guy that you find as a friend of Rehunanossi? He came up with Marcus Aurelius. Which again, I don't think is actually true, but it's a very good guess, because which Roman emperor had any interest in philosophy other than Marcus Aurelius? And so you see, his books are full of all kinds of these insights, if you're interested in this subject. If you're not, it's boring. Halevi was convinced of the strengths of his arguments would be so powerful that the non-religious would be compelled to admit their correctness. This would compel them, in his vision, to reevaluate their entire theological stance, to drop atheism, reform, and return, if not to orthodoxy, then at least to Jewish traditionalism. He was nuts. Okay? That was not going to happen. Okay? The Jewish academic world which in his time was what? There were no Jewish professors at universities, because the University of Anti-Semitic wouldn't have a Jewish professor. So the seminary professors from the different JTSs, maskilim, and historians, private Jewish historians, they hate him. And therefore they deliberately ignored his book. You don't review it. That's how you go. Deliberately ignore the book. Or else they sneeringly noted its shortcomings without critiquing his arguments. Okay? The non-Jewish academic or the Goyish world, of course, completely ignored it. First of all, he couldn't read it. Right? This drove him crazy. He thought he's a revolutionary. He wanted textbooks based on Doros HaRishonim that should spread throughout Jewish schools all over the world. And if the non-religious schools, at least the religious schools should use them, at least the from-day schools. The whole attitude is reflected in his very complex relationship with this guy, Zev Yavitz, who's more or less one of the founders of Mizrahi and one of the most influential in the first half of the 20th century Jewish historians, even though he doesn't hold a candle to him, and he admits it. Okay? Yavitz, they had a whole love-hate relationship. Yavitz, perhaps you had this in the house. It's 11 volumes, Told Us Yimei Yisrael. This is the Mizrahi version of Jewish history from long ago. Yavitz, by the way, invented Tu B'Shvat. No, I mean it. As a holiday, he's the one who made it. He made Tu B'Shvat. They plant trees and all that sort of thing. So he's, he wrote poems. He was a very, very interesting person, one of the early pioneers in Palestine, although his health broke down, he had to move away. And he keeps telling him, look, you're a better writer than I am. You can put out the 12 M's. Read my stuff. He says, I read your stuff. Your stuff is very good. But he had already been too influenced by what was out there, and he couldn't bring himself to reorganize the textbooks to conform to what he wanted. And here you have your breakup and your division already almost 100 years ago between the Agudah and the Mizrahi of different types of versions of Jewish history. And the Agudah is saying like this: you're taking the non-from stuff and just putting a kosher stamp on it, putting star K, right? You need to reevaluate, honestly, the whole past and see that everything they're saying in the history books are lies, okay? If you're going to be a historian, do the trouble like I did to work it through. Now, Halevi wanted pure Haredi history, untainted, as he saw it, by Maskilik and Wissenschaft, pseudo-scholarship. He was intellectually honest enough to say that sometimes the other guys get it right, but he didn't want the real history, as he saw it, to be obscured by academic conventions created by the non-from using the academic voice, which is what happens all the time until today. The best he could get in his time was being included in the pantheon of historians of the Talmud in dry, specialized studies. If you get a book like this from 1933, you can already fall asleep looking at the title, So he said there are 6 opinions on the formation of Mishnah. There's Grants, there's Weiss, there's Halevi, all that sort of thing. So that's not what he had. Let's put it this way. To some degree, he was a frustrated person. As I said, most people, even Yeshiva Bachram in Europe, found his writing style a total turnoff. It's very hard to read. Okay? He was a terrible writer. The Gedolim, the big rabbis in Europe, they were delighted to have a from nusach of the ancient history, right, of ancient Judaism, although I don't think they had the patience to read it either. Maybe I'm wrong. They did not deign to critique it, which would have been a sign of intellectual respect. Because, as I say, only weirdos are into Jewish history. You see? The key thing with them is we have our own past. If you want to know what the past, read Halevi. You get it? In other words, now it was out there. Chaim Ozer was very strong this way. Rabbi Isaac Sher from Slobodka was very profoundly influenced by his writings. But they did what I just told you, which is, Halevi has it all. Don't believe these other books. Read it. He's got it. What did he say? I don't know. Whatever he say, he's the one that, he's the one that did it. It did not get into Israeli history textbooks. In State of Israel, Modern Israel, it's all, the religious Zionists all used long time, Yavitz for decades. You understand? Which, as I say before, was the other ones just with a little hechsher on it. Okay? Notice any particularly anti-religious or anti-Chazal statements were elided in the text, but basically they're using that approach. But Halevi had started something, even though it took a long time to get off the ground. Interestingly, in America, the person that got in love with him, Victor Miller, right? Where's Mr. There you go. He said, maybe, right? Victor Miller, of course, from Baltimore, as we know, TA graduate, went off to YU when the very early years, and then went to Europe to study Slobodka. So very religious. I mean, you don't need me to tell you. Very religious. And in Slobodka, he's with Isaac Sher, who introduces them to the writings of Halevi, and he really gets into it. Victor Miller was a radical. Would you agree with that statement? And and eventually, later in his career, he ended up as the mashgiach for 20 years, something like that, in Chaim Berlin, Rav Hutner's time. And as a mashgiach, not only does he give what you call Musar Shmuz and this sort of thing, but he also gives history class, because he realized they didn't know in the past and he wants to get it right. And so he lectured on this for many years, using Halevi basically as his text. And as a result of all these shiurim and things he get over the years, he rewrote the whole thing in English and put it in normal order. You get it? So in other words, you can either do it the hard way by reading the original, or you can do it the easy way, read it in English and in order. And that's Torah Nation and Eternal People and maybe one other volume. But this is the Second Temple period, and this is the Talmudic period. And I can tell you, it's not word for word Halevi, but it almost is. You get it? Even when Halevi has a sneering remark, Victor puts in a sneering remark, He just upgrades a little bit. Not only is Halevi digs the Haskalah, he also takes a couple digs at the state of Israel, But that's what it is. If anybody's interested in this, and Halevi goes into more detail that this guy said this, and Avigdor will say the history writers say so and so. But it's the same set of arguments over here. As a true radical, Rabbi Avigdor Miller glories in the counter-historical quality of Doros HaRishonim. He loves that stuff. That's who he was. He says all the history books are wrong, and all these guys are liars, okay? And this is the only real version of the subject, and here's why, okay? Now, in the last third of the 20th century, a half century or so after the death of Halevi, a frum mass sociologically comes to be formed in American Israel. As we know, that's part of the world in which we live. Large enough and vigorous enough to create an entire subculture, completely independent, I should say, from mainstream, not from Jewish culture. That's an interesting thing that's happened in our time. Maybe it's under the radar screen for some people. There's a huge population in America that doesn't buy the JPS, right? That doesn't buy all these other things. They buy Art Scroll. They have an entirely alternative, self-contained culture. This was something that never happened. The subculture develops its own intellectual universe. I'd say this happened in the last 40 years. A giant intellectual ghetto, or if you prefer, a gated community. In America, as we all know, the poster boy for this, Art Scroll. Correct? So if you're part of this movement, it's Art Scroll born, Art Scroll bred, and when you die, Art Scroll dead. You have no problem. But I know it sounds funny, but this is where these are the books you're interested in buying, not the others. About Judaism, that is to say. The crown jewel, of course, is the Gemara, the Art Scroll Schottenstein Talmud, which, of course, is totally not Gores, the Mechkar, correct? The Art Scroll Talmud is like Halevi. They're totally proud about saying, we're not interested in what the university professors have to say about the Talmud or any of this kind of stuff. They can do their things if they want. We do our thing, and we're not interested in anything you have to say. This is a principled stance, as they say. They'll be the first to say so. It infuriates the academics, of course, but big deal. The academics do the same thing. This is a friend of mine, Professor Gafni, in Hebrew U. And I did give you an example of what I'm talking about. Maybe I told this story before. I was once in the 90s in a conference in Jerusalem, the Institute of Advanced Studies in Hebrew U, and we're having lunch, and he tells me, and he's a religious guy, and he tells me that he came to America for a chasana, and which was in Flatbush, Borough Park, something like that, and he had a couple hours so he went into Eichler's, just to see, even though he's a professor, just to see what the masses are doing. And he sees history of Jewish people, Yamda Pumbedisa, which is his era of expertise. So he figures, Art Scroll, but what the heck, he couldn't resist. So he opened it up, he's flipping through, he says, this is not so bad. And he goes a few more pages, this is talking not so bad. And a few more pages, this is actually good. I'm shocked. And then a few more pages, this is plagiarized from me. Right? So I asked him, I said, so what happened? What'd you do about that? He said, I put the book away. I could never admit to anybody in Israel I ever read an Art Scroll book. Understand? So you have two parallel universes, each one totally not goes the other. All right? Now, if that's the case, a subculture such as I'm describing, which is growing, correct? The non-from are shrinking. The religious ones are growing. You know that demographically. So such a culture requires its own history, does it not? You're not who you are in present if you don't have a past. Okay? And it is producing it. The barrel wine and that sort of thing is all aimed for this market. Right? This is a thing that's not meant for the other Jews, right? But it's totally meant for within this culture. So and the irony today is a whole lot more Jews are reading the from history books than the non-from ones, simply because the secular Judaism has collapsed as a culture. Out in Baltimore, Maryland, I wish this wasn't the case, but this is the case. In Baltimore, Maryland, or Philadelphia, or anywhere else, Jews who are not Orthodox, young people, whatever, do they read history books, Jewish history books? No. In other words, it's not what it was once upon a time when people were interested in Zionism, in Israel, active in Jewish causes, and therefore they'll read something from Cecil Roth all the way. They're post-Jewish times, so to speak, as they say. You understand? It's not who it is. And so, in terms of numbers, whatever the historians say, if the Art Scroll puts out a book, it's read by 100,000 people. If a professor puts out a book, no matter how good it is, it's read by 100 people. Maybe. You see? Well, it's very infuriating. You get it? So, in this light, I come to my conclusion. The historical significance of the Doros HaRishonim, Yitzhak Isaac HaLevi he was the founder of this modern from history stream, good or bad, which is indeed being used to buttress the Jewish loyalties of its readers. Notice, he was the one, and all these books like Berwine and the others have this point in which they try to make you more Jewish. Get it? They want you to be proud of being Jewish. That's their agenda. And it's being read by thousands and hundreds of thousands of people. You add Israel together, it's 500,000 people. By contrast, today, a lot of the non-religious history books are undermining Jewish loyalty to Yiddishkeit and to the state of Israel. So, for example, if you read Shlomo, these are two recent books perhaps you see reviewed over here from Shlomo Sand, who's a professor at Tel Aviv University, among other places in Paris. The Jewish people, Israel does not exist. It's a figment of imagination. And the Jewish people do not exist. It's a figment of imagination. So what is the point of this history? And by the way, he's an award-winning guy. What's the point of this history? Undermine. You see? So the person, after they read this, what do they feel about their own Judaism? So it's interesting. It's not only a from versus non-from thing, but it's a reinforcing versus undermining thing that's happening today, which is very, very interesting. Okay? You go to Barnes & Noble, if you wish, and pull one of these titles off. And very often, not always, of course, not always, but very often, you'll find one who will undermine Israel, will undermine Jewish culture, undermine any Jewish claims to anything in the past. So what did he write it for? Well, you get ahead in the academic world that way. You see? You'll be admired as an iconoclast, what they call the new historians, such as people, Ilan Papa and Benny Morris and all the other guys over there, Avi Shleim. They can show you how bad Israel was from day one. Therefore, Israel doesn't deserve to exist. And so I leave with one last, very interesting, perhaps disturbing thought, and that is how Yitzhak Isaac HaLevi left no successors. Nobody picked up the ball in 100 years from where, it's literally 100, he died in 1914, for where he was a unique, he was a phenomenon. And that is indeed food for thought. And with that, I bid you good night.